Welcome on into the Matt Lombardo Show, presented by Heavy. I am Heavy Sports NFL insider Matt Lombardo. We have a big show in front of us, a great conversation to look forward to with former NFL general manager, the 2000 NFL Executive of the Year, Randy Mueller is here. He'll break down all of the biggest storylines across the league. We'll have my pick of the week coming up for this coming Sunday slate. You don't want to miss that. We'll give out the Lombardo Trophy for the second week in a row. I think it's a good one. You're going to want to hang around for that. And if you enjoy the show, please go ahead and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Check us out on YouTube and leave those 5-star reviews. Let us know what you like about the show. Maybe some guests that you might want to have on the program. I will go and get them and we will bring them to you. And without further ado, Randy Mueller joined us. So you can find him on Twitter at @RandyMueller_. Randy, how you doing, man? Thanks for taking the time.
I'm doing great, Matt. Thanks for having me on. It's good to be in the Lombardo Lounge. Sounds pretty good.
I love it, the Lombardo Lounge. We're going to have to trademark that and maybe get a neon sign and hang it right over there. That'd be great. And we'll send cigars just for the naming rights to return the favor there. And, you know, Randy, you and I, we talk a lot of football, right? On the air and off. We watch all the games. What we saw last week in Denver on Thursday night, to me, that was an affront to quarterback play in the NFL. I feel like it set the league back 20 years in terms of poor quarterback play from Russell Wilson and Matt Ryan. And, you know, you've been in that chair before. You've been a general manager. Are these two in these two situations not a cautionary tale to teams going against trading for a veteran quarterback when you don't have a Super Bowl ready roster for them to lead to the promised land?
Well, I think that the lesson has been there for everybody. I don't know anybody's heeded it, but when you take guys at 35, 36, not everybody's going to play as long as Tom Brady has. That's just a fact. So I also think that, and as you mentioned, they're organizational failures or successes. So the roster matters. Who you put around them matters. The offensive schemes matter. So there's a lot of people in play in both of these instances. And yeah, last week was a struggle. There's no doubt. It was not top quality play. I don't think the league benefits from games like that. Now, you obviously have a Thursday kind of black eye anyway. I don't think the quality is ever great on Thursday night, but right. This one even took me back. I compared it to, Matt, when we built strike teams in 1987. The quality of play was that bad, and it was a struggle. And so, hopefully we don't see that continue with these guys. Obviously, these two quarterbacks in particular have long legacies. They've been successful. It was just kind of sad to see what that had become.
Now, where do the Broncos go from here? Because obviously you've been in similar situations where you've had to find a quarterback, but they don't have a first-round pick. They don't have a second-round pick until 2024. So not only do you have Russell Wilson, who you extended, you gave $166 million guaranteed to, but you didn't have a first and second-round pick in 2022. You don't have a first or a second-round pick in 2023. And I think we're seeing how far away that roster is, even from keeping pace with the Chiefs and the Chargers, and maybe to a lesser extent, but still the Raiders. What do you do? How do you fix it from here when you're kind of committed to Russ?
It's probably keeping George Payton awake at night for sure, because I think you can fix the roster, Matt. That's not, for me, as hard as what do we do now? We've paid this guy $250 million. You know, there's really no escaping that. That's franchise altering and handicapping if they get that kind of play. Now, hopefully he doesn't play like that and they don't play around him like they did. But I've spent money on free agents in the past, and occasionally you don't get what you think you're getting, but not to the tune of $250 million. That is a headache and a stomach ache. And I know George, he worked with me in Miami. It's a tough spot. I don't know how much due diligence they did. I live in Seattle, so I saw some of this kind of seeping out the last year and a half, but not to the extent that we saw last week. So there were glimmers that this might trend downward a little bit. They jumped on board. They paid him the money. New ownership, new coach, a lot of different moving parts there. We'll see. But I think the easiest thing for me would be to fix the roster. I think you're stuck with Russell Wilson right now. I don't think there's any way around it.
How much tougher is that to do, though? Because you hear all the time how easy it is when you have your quarterback on a rookie deal and you have all that cap space. You don't have to pay him. You'd obviously have a full war chest of draft picks if you had a hand-picked quarterback. But the inverse of that, I don't think anybody ever talks about how hard it is or how difficult it is and how, precision-like you need to be when you don't have that draft capital, when you have committed $252 million to Russell Wilson. How much harder is it on this side of that coin? And how hard is it going to be for George Payton?
It's really hard because you're right. Usually when you take over a team, like for instance, when I went to New Orleans as their GM, they had a ton of cap space. They didn't have a lot of draft picks because they had given the draft picks away in a Ricky Williams deal and some other things, but we had cap space. So we were able to massage the roster a little bit by adding some guys. Other places you might go, you have no cap space. So you got to kind of use your draft picks to get cheap labor. In this case, as you point out, they don't have either. They don't have draft picks or cap space. So it's a hard deal. I think what they're going to have to hit on some lower round selections. They're going to have to hit on some minimal salary free agents, maybe identify a couple young ascending players that just haven't worked out elsewhere and take a little risk on them. You may hit gold on some second or third round pick somewhere else who's at the end of his deal but just hasn't played. That's the kind of things they're going to look for. They're definitely going to have to lean on scouts and evaluators to kind of rob Peter to pay Paul to make this thing work because, as you mentioned, they're clearly not good enough right now, at least through 5 games.
No, it's a really tough spot, and it's not going to get easier because of the long-term commitment to Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
And, you talked about seeing some of these things maybe brewing underneath the surface when you were in Seattle, right? And I reached out to a scouting director in the AFC on Friday morning and just asked him, what the heck is going on here? Because he doesn't look like the same quarterback. And he told me point blank that he looks lost, that he doesn't look like a veteran quarterback. What are you seeing? Is this just miscast in Nathaniel Hackett's offense? Were there some things that you saw in Seattle that made you think that maybe this wasn't going to be such a great idea? What have you seen from Russell that gives you a little bit of pause and you would be concerned if you were in their spot?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I've noticed the last year and a half in Seattle, other than he just didn't play well, was his legs weren't what they used to be. This guy made a living for years on escaping pressure and then not necessarily running. He was timely as a runner, but he would extend plays. He always knew when to get rid of the ball. He always knew he could make something happen on third down before he ran out of bounds, that kind of stuff. And you haven't seen any of that magician playmaking ability at all yet. So that's been a problem in Seattle. That I don't think is going to change where he's at. I don't see many guys where their legs get quicker, stronger, faster the older they get. So that is what they have to deal with. The other moving parts are Nathaniel Hackett as the head coach is 2 chairs above what he's ever been in his life.
Right.
I mean, he might have had the coordinator's title in Green Bay, but we all know who runs the offense. Matt LaFleur runs the offense, and he had the final say on everything they did, and he called the plays. So he didn't do any of that stuff. So that's a big step up. And oh, by the way, you're not only going to have to do that, Nathaniel, you got to be the head coach too. So it is a giant leap of faith that the Broncos thought they could make. Time will tell. It looks to me like there's, some doubt at least, that's for sure, after a month.
And let's switch gears a little bit here. You brought up Russell Wilson's mobility and that used to be a playmaker with his legs, and that was really the driving force of his game and what made him special. Mm-hmm. There might not be a more special talent when it comes to being a mobile quarterback in this league right now than Lamar Jackson, maybe the most dynamic playmaker in the league, not named Patrick Mahomes. And you saw it the other night. I believe it was his 7th fourth quarter comeback against the Cincinnati Bengals, a division rival that they had to have. And they're a handful of plays away from being 5-0 right now. When you look at what happened in Miami in that game, and of course at the end against Buffalo. You and I talked about this off air. His contract situation is fascinating to me because he doesn't have an agent. He's looking for that guaranteed money that Deshaun Watson got from the Cleveland Browns. But how does his fast start and where he has the Ravens right now and the level that he's playing at, how does that impact the contract talks? How does that impact his future in Baltimore, in your opinion?
I really don't think it does, Matt. I'll be honest with you. I think they know what they have. He's a really good player. They've gone all in with everything they've done with their team to surround Lamar with the best parts they think. Now they can continue to upgrade, for him, whether it's up front in the offensive line or on the perimeter, but I don't think it's going to change the contract situation. At least my experience is you offer the best deal you can at some point before training camp starts. And once they pass on that deal, We're not going to all of a sudden say, oh, he's worth 10 more million, or, oh, all of a sudden we're going to guarantee the whole thing. It's just not going to happen. The Ravens have also been a team that has always been worried about precedent in that comes in the way they negotiate, in the decisions that they make, and the business deals that they make. So I don't see that changing. So if Lamar is hung up on this, a contract being the number one thing that floats his boat, I just don't know that it's going to happen there. The Ravens do have 2 more years of rights to him, so to speak. So, they don't have to sign him to another deal right now. They can have him for a couple more years and play this thing out. But if that's the hill Lamar is going to die on, that's going to be, I think it's going to be a struggle, because I don't really see any way they give him a fully guaranteed deal, regardless of how he plays. It's just it affects too many other things you do in the future. So I don't think that's going to happen with the Ravens.
Yeah, and I spoke to an agent a couple of weeks ago about this, and he basically told me point blank that what the Browns did, it was desperation. They were desperate to get Deshaun Watson, desperate to get that player. And the Ravens don't, at least today, maybe that changes 2 years down the line after tagging him twice, but they don't have that desperation with Lamar Jackson. They know that they have the leverage and they have the control.
I think the big thing is we'll see how they play the game, because at some point the Ravens have to, I won't say shift gears, but they got to pivot a little bit and give themselves a fallback. So they may have to draft a quarterback. And I'm not saying you're replacing Lamar or you're drafting one in the first round, but you got to give yourself options. And maybe round 2 or round 3 next year, come draft time, is somewhere where they do give themselves some options just to protect themselves. That's all. If that's the hill he's going for, and we already know, I don't think the Ravens are going to do it. At some point, they were going to have to, give themselves another option, because he won't be able to tag him forever. That's for sure.
For sure. And you look at another big story this week is what went down in Carolina, because, I've spoken to a couple players in the Panthers locker room, and they're kind of furious because the Panthers committed 5 years to Matt Rhule. They give him 2 years and they're 2 years and 5 games, and it wasn't working.
Right.
But I think that it wasn't working because they hadn't figured out the quarterback situation, because there were holes on the roster, because Baker Mayfield didn't come in, and I don't think it was the Baker Mayfield that we saw in his prime when he took the Browns into Arrowhead and nearly beat Mahomes in the playoffs. But what's your takeaway about the situation with the Panthers? And, you've been involved with hiring process. What's your sales pitch to a prospective head coach to come into that situation with that owner who just made that move after such a short time?
Well, it's a tough spot. There's no doubt. I'm not sure it's completely fair to Matt Rhule, and you say that, but he's getting $40 million to walk away. I get it. But Here's the deal. Matt Rhule came from college, and they made him the head decision maker. He hired the GM, Scott Fitterer. So it's a lot to ask of a college coach to come learn the pro game. I got news for you. There is no learning curve in the NFL. It's not on-the-job training. And that's what Matt got, was on-the-job training for a couple of years. That's not really fair. I mean, you're in my opinion, you're positioned to fail if that's the case. So who knows how it turns out at the end of the day? Obviously, with him gone, I would ask this first before we just start throwing coaches out there. Who's going to be in charge and who's going to hire the coach? Is it going to hire? Are we going to hire a real, let's just say 100% GM, or are we going to hire? And I like Scott. I know him well. I have no issue with him, but somebody has to be elevated to be the decision maker is all I'm saying. So the structure has to be defined before we start considering what coach makes sense. Now, if they wanted to go with a guy like Sean Payton, he'll probably carry some swag to be able to structure things more to his liking. And maybe they do that. But to ask another college, and I don't think they'll do this, but to ask a college coach like they did Matt Rhule to come on board and learn the pro game under these kind of circumstances, I think you're destined to fail. It's just not a good formula right now.
Sean Payton is a fascinating one, because obviously we've heard his name floated in Dallas, and you have everything about the history with Jerry Jones, but would he work for Jerry Jones?
Yeah.
I wonder if someone like Sean Payton would work alongside and for David Tepper, because, Tepper strikes me as a guy who clearly it seems like has short patience after what happened with Matt Rhule. I've heard that he was involved pretty significantly in the day-to-day, but he doesn't carry the same cachet and the same high profile in the way that Jerry Jones does. I wonder if that's a situation that Sean Payton would be interested in, and I wonder if Payton's the guy that Tepper would throw $50 million on the table for, similar to what he did with Matt Rhule.
Well, I think at least you're getting a guy that has experience within the league and has proved he can, have success for sure. I think the thing about Sean that jumps out at me is it's not as simple as finding the landing spot for him. The first thing that has to happen is they've got to get rights from the Saints. So it's got to be a team that's willing to probably give their first round pick to even have a consideration.
To a division rival. Yeah.
So I really can't see that happening. That's not a good fit. Mickey Loomis will have say where Sean Payton goes. And I know he won't hold him up, but I don't know about going to a division rival. So I don't know that that makes sense. The other place is I don't know that Sean's going somewhere where he's not the final decision maker. There's 25 teams in the league that won't allow that either. So there's some hurdles. You've got to put the coach in charge as coach and GM. You've got to be willing to probably give a first round pick to the Saints that they have to accept. That eliminates a lot of people. And you've got to be willing to pay probably $10 million a year. There's 20 teams in the league that aren't going to pay their coach that kind of money. So I'm just saying there's some hurdles. Not that Sean's not worth all of that, but there are many owners that will not in the NFL pay that price in all three of those categories.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And I think that a situation where you have a lot of alignment now between general manager and head coach, that's in Philadelphia. And the Eagles have arguably the most complete roster in the NFL. Maybe the Bills. I said it on the podcast last week. I think the Bills and the Eagles are on a collision course for the Super Bowl. But I think the job that Howie Roseman has done, building a roster with playmakers at all three levels of the defense, upgrading that unit significantly, getting A.J. Brown, Jalen Hurts has made major strides with familiarity in the system and with new weapons at receiver, top 2 offensive line in the league. But they have those 2 first-round picks. And they have a Super Bowl window. So if it were Randy Mueller in Philadelphia, what would you be shopping for? What would you be looking for at the deadline if you were trying to solidify your chance of winning a Super Bowl this year? When you look at their roster and their needs, what would you be looking for at the deadline?
Well, I think the only thing they could look for at the deadline, and really I've used this theory for years, is you might gain some depth, but I don't think you're going to get a difference maker. Nobody's going to give that up. The trade deadline in football is not like it is in baseball or basketball, because there's an integration process. Those guys aren't going to show up on Wednesday and play Friday night, in the NFL. It just doesn't happen. So I don't know that he gets rich with anything. I surely wouldn't give away those kind of picks that you mentioned. I just think this team needs to continue to grow as they are. I would make an argument, Matt, the other way around, minimize change. That's what I would be wanting to do. We've had enough change. We've added to our roster. We've done kind of everything we can do right now. Let's continue to grow. If we can add a guy that's a depth piece that protects us against an injury down the road, okay, that's fine. But I would probably minimize change in Howie's case and just ride this thing out and hope that Jalen Hurts continues to develop. I love their team, like you mentioned. I think Howie's done an awesome job. I think they're the team to beat right now, and teams got to come after them. So I don't know that I'd be willing to give away one of those valuable top choices next year, whether they need a quarterback or not. I don't think they do. I'm a Jalen Hurts guy. So I think they're positioned to really improve their roster, but it's going to be in the offseason and probably draft-wise more than anything else.
From a former executive of the year, is Howie the runaway favorite for that award?
Oh, I would say so right now. Now, we're early. I mean, I always said this, Matt, if after 5 weeks, we're all 3 weeks from a total mutiny. So it doesn't matter. In 3 weeks, they could be looking for Howie's head. That's just the way the NFL is. So
especially in Philadelphia, right?
Yeah, especially in Philadelphia. But I would say right now, for sure, he's done an awesome job. And I couldn't name anybody that is more deserving of it, but we still have a long ways to go.
I know it's early. We're only 5 weeks in, as you said. But who's the best team in football right now? Because I watched what Buffalo did on Sunday, and they're a machine. And the Chiefs, they can bury themselves in a 17-0 hole and make it look easy coming back to win. We've touched on the Eagles. Who's the best team right now today?
I'll answer that, but I want to ask you one question. Did you think on the Monday night game that with the Chiefs, when the Chiefs fell behind 17-0, that game was over? Did you have any doubt that at some point they're probably going to make a run and maybe win the game?
I mean, I think I tweeted they were in trouble or they better be careful.
Oh, you did? Oh, I didn't know that. My bad. I never thought
I never thought the Lombardo Lounge. Come on, man.
We need to light a cigar. I never thought that I thought they'd come back no matter what. I just felt like that's
their MO, isn't it? I mean, that's their MO. You saw it in the playoffs 2 years ago. They're
always going to be in the game.
Yeah.
Having said that, I do think Buffalo is the best team. I think I would pay to watch Josh Allen play every week. I love what he does with his legs, with his arm. He's kind of the combination of Mahomes, like you mentioned, and Lamar Jackson. Different style, but same production as a runner and as a passer. So I think they are, they got there. There's a hunger to them. They were on the edge last year, and really because of their own undoing the last 13 seconds, they've got a little bit of an edge and a little bit of a vindication to come with, and which matters in the playoffs. So I think right now I'd pick Buffalo to be the best team.
There's a nastiness to that team. There's certainly a motivation to them. And, you look at the 98-yard touchdown to Gabriel Davis, and you come back later, you hit him over the top again on a 63-yard touchdown. I mean, it's nuts. You look at Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts led the league in yards per attempt coming into Sunday, 9.1 yards per attempt through the first 4 games. There was a point in Sunday's game where Josh Allen averaged 17.25 yards per attempt. Now, I know there's a 98-yard score mixed in there, Randy, but that was a team on a mission. It was a surgeon at quarterback, and it was a deep threat that was in lockstep with his quarterback against a pretty good secondary. I mean, Micah Fitzpatrick is no slouch.
Yeah, really good.
He beat him twice.
Yep. Hey, when he throws the ball, Matt, it's like kids playing out in the yard with a Nerf ball. I think, gosh, can that really happen? Did he just make that throw? I mean, it's unfair. And he's a big, strong dude, so he's running over people. I think he's the best player in the league.
And, I couldn't be more impressed by what's happening in New York right now with the Giants. And Brian Daboll, we're going to talk about this a little bit later on in the podcast, but the job he's doing right now with them being bought in, and you have Marcus Johnson and David Sills as your wide receivers. You have Saquon Barkley in the medical tent for a few plays on Sunday against the Packers, and you smoke them.
Yeah.
And you're 4-1, and they've bought in. I guess the question I have for you about the Giants, Randy, is are they for real? And what's their ceiling given where they are with the quarterback, with the injuries? What's your take on New York right now?
Well, I'm with you on Brian Daboll. I think he's not only very smart, but he's a really good communicator. And it's clear that he's brought this team together quickly than any of us thought. I think the confidence that he instilled early in the season when he went for that win was at opening weekend. I think they're still reaping some of the benefits from that. I don't think it's always the most talented team that wins. I think that it's the team that plays the best. And he's got parts that haven't in the past produced like they are now, playing at a really high level. Ceiling, a wild card team, probably. Beyond that, all you got to do is get in. You never know. But I don't know that they're set to make a playoff run per se, long haul, but he's really proven himself to be not only an NFL coach, but one that can make a difference on Sunday. And that's the thing I find most when these franchises hire new coaches like this. It really comes down to, can they make a difference on Sunday? They can be motivating people. They can hand out new T-shirts every week. They can do this or that. But it comes down to, how do you help us win on Sunday? And Brian has done that as good as anybody. Obviously, he's the play caller.
Yeah, and I think they're really bought in there. And I think you're right. I think the aggressiveness in week 1 has really lifted them through the whole thing. And Wink Martindale is a defensive coordinator. The blitz that he dialed up with Xavier McKinney on that pivotal third down play deep in the red zone that won the game for them.
Right.
They just feel like that they're playing their asses off for that coaching staff. And I'm impressed by it. I really am.
Yeah. And we'll see how it plays out. I think depth might be an issue with them. They're going to have some injuries probably at some point that I don't know that they're going to be able to overcome. But these things happen. It's about that coaching staff bringing a group together once the season starts. I find that is probably as underrated of as a narrative as there is in the league right now. Everybody looks at their fantasy team and they look at all their roster positions, but it is every day an up and down battle for GMs and head coaches to keep the team on the rails. You got to manage your team for 17 weeks through thick, through thin, through injuries, through issues off the field, for problems that these players have. And so far, Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll have done a really good job doing it. We'll see if it lasts.
Yeah, I think they've done a great job. And the flip side of that coin, and really appreciate the time, Randy, this is the last one before I let you go. Who's the team entering the trade deadline here that's most likely to be sellers? Because everybody wants to talk about who's buying, but I know it might be a little bit early and we're only 5 weeks in, but there are some teams whose seasons have come off the rails. If you were a GM, who's your first phone call right now, tonight?
Well, I'm looking for people that, maybe a team like Seattle, where you could get a guy who's going to maybe not be extended. Yeah, that's really what you're looking for, is contracts that aren't being extended at their current place that you might be able to get as a rental for the rest of the year. You don't have to give them a deal, but they already have decided they're not going to pay him. And it's really, like you mentioned, second level down type players. I love the fact that they extended the trade deadline, Matt. For all my years in the league, the trade deadline was after week 6. It's just not enough time. I complained all the time. You just don't know your team. And now it's been pushed back a couple weeks, so you're more apt to make a deal. You can really know your team, and you can also know where your weaknesses are, that injury-wise, some of the other issues that you've kind of waded through, you have until week 8 to make a deal. So that was a good change by the league. But I don't know, as far as some of these teams, again, it's not like baseball where you're going to sell a bunch of things. I think it's harder to replace parts in football than any other sport. So I don't think you're going to see teams selling off players. The league is frankly been against that for years. And that's the biggest reason they didn't want to move the trade deadline back, because they were afraid they would create sellers and teams that were out of it. And they don't want that. They want to keep the parity, and teams for the most part want to keep their good players. So different dynamic. But I don't know that you'll really find buyers and sellers per se.
He's Randy Mueller. You can follow him on Twitter at @RandyMueller_. Randy, where can people find you? What do you have going on? I know you're a part of the Heavy team here. We're glad to have you at Heavy. Where can people read you? Where can they follow you? What do you have going on?
Well, I write out for a blog on my own website, MuellerFootball.com, and that's a weekly blog, sometimes bi-weekly, depending on what I have going. I also am, pretty active on the radio front. I do a lot of radio stuff, but I love to be with Heavy like you have. Welcome you on board, and hopefully we'll do this again.
Absolutely, Randy. Great to be teammates. Appreciate the time, and I look forward to talking to you further up the road, my friend.
Thanks, Matt.
He's Randy Mueller, always really insightful, always great to talk football with, whether it's X's and O's in the game, the trade deadline, as he mentioned. And, one nugget that I had been making some calls on leading into recording the podcast on Tuesday throughout the afternoon is trying to get a gauge on the defensive end market. Because you think about all of the teams that might need pass rushers. Obviously, Cleveland has been pretty banged up, and they're on the cusp of making a playoff run, making a playoff push in the AFC. You have the Eagles, who I know Randy said that the move for Howie Roseman is to minimize moves, value continuity, look to build in the offseason. But I think that a rotational defensive end, especially with Derek Barnett being out, could be an area the Eagles go shopping. I think the Browns could be kicking the tires there. I think that the Broncos might need to look at defensive ends at some point behind Bradley Chubb. The problem comes in is I think that from my conversation with sources on both sides, team side, agent side, the defensive end market is going to be slow to develop. And to Randy's point, it's really going to come down to which teams are ascending and which teams are struggling as we get close to the trade deadline in November. I think that the next 2 or 3 weeks are really going to determine whether or not a Montez Sweat in Washington, or whether or not, Matt Ioannidis in Carolina it becomes available. And the Panthers are probably throwing the for sale sign up there. You have to see how this plays out over the next several weeks, because I don't think that any team is going to be in a rush to give away or trade away an impact pass rusher, because it's such a premium position. And I think the ones that become available, that market isn't going to really open up until we see what their current teams are doing. And flipping over to the offensive side of the ball, Randy and I touched on it a little bit with Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. And I look at Josh Allen, and I saw that game on Sunday afternoon, and I've seen the Bills a couple of times. But what he did on Sunday was unbelievable. He had over 300 passing yards in the first half. He had 3 passing touchdowns in the first half. I watched Josh Allen. I watched the Buffalo Bills. I see all of the weapons they have on offense. I see the numbers that he's putting up. Josh Allen is lapping the field in the MVP race. I don't even know who would be second at this point. Maybe you look at Patrick Mahomes. I love the furious comeback from 17 down the other night against the Las Vegas Raiders. Mahomes is obviously one of the more dynamic talents in the NFL. Same with Lamar Jackson. I think Jackson is playing some of the best football of his career. Maybe you throw Jalen Hurts on the fringes of that conversation because of what he's doing both with his legs as a runner, particularly in the red zone, and improving as a passer and improving his timing and his accuracy. And having A.J. Brown there certainly helps. But I don't know that anybody touches Josh Allen at this point when it comes to the MVP race. And we talked with Randy about how Jalen Hurts entered last week at 9.1 yards per passing attempt, and that's the metric that GMs and coaches use to really, truly evaluate quarterback play. Jalen Hurts entered at 9.1. You look at what Josh Allen did against the Steelers. He averaged 13.7 yards per attempt. Again, I know there's two big plays. I know there's a 98-yarder and there's a 62-yard touchdown that kind of skew those averages. But to average over 13 yards per passing attempt in the NFL, that's monumental. Josh Allen now leads all quarterbacks in passing yards. His 14 passing touchdowns trail only Patrick Mahomes, and Mahomes has 15. And he's also rushed for 2 touchdowns. So you look at what Josh Allen is doing, he's accounted for 16 touchdowns on the year. And the Bills' only loss came in Miami on a day when it was 180% humidity. It was 97 degrees. And if it weren't for a play going out of bounds with time expiring, not getting able to get the snap off to spike it and kick a field goal, they win that game. And they're on a mission. We talked about it with Randy Mueller. The Bills are on a mission. Josh Allen is playing at peak level. If you were starting a football team today, your first pick is probably either Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, or Joe Burrow. And I think right now, Josh Allen would have to be the guy. He'd have to be the guy that you build around because of what he's doing from a versatility standpoint with the arm strength, the accuracy, his mobility. He's a monster. Or as one AFC scout said, he's a cyborg at quarterback. Good luck slowing that team down. I wrote about this last week. It is going to take 60 minutes of perfect football to beat the Bills. And you have to hope that you don't get 60 minutes of the Bills playing perfect football because they're pretty much unbeatable. So I think that Josh Allen is going to run away with the MVP trophy. But I think that when you flip the script and you look at the defensive side of the ball, I don't know that anybody's coming close to Micah Parsons when it comes to Defensive Player of the Year. What Micah Parsons is doing right now is truly special. And I think that when you look at pound for pound as the most talented players in the entire NFL, there aren't 3 people that I would take before Micah Parsons. I mean, what he did on Sunday afternoon against the Los Angeles Rams, suffering a groin injury in the middle of the game, playing through it, busting out the entire game, 2 sacks, including a pivotal sack at the end of the game with the game on the line for the Cowboys. And he took care of business. He forced a fumble in that game. He has 6 sacks. He's on pace for 20 and a half, which is just 2 shy of the NFL's single season sack record. I don't know that there are 5 people in the NFL that I would take before Micah Parsons if you're talking about the most talented players in the league today. And he's a centerpiece to the Dallas Cowboys defense. And he's the most important player on that team. He's more important than Dak Prescott. He's more important than Ezekiel Elliott or Tony Pollard or CeeDee Lamb. Look what Cooper Rush has done with Dak Prescott sidelined. Look at how efficient that offense has been able to be. Micah Parsons is more valuable. He's more important. And everyone that I talk to inside the league, and it doesn't even take league insider conversations, your eyes will tell you this. He's an elite player. He's one of the most gifted players at his position. Pro Football Focus has him as the number 2 edge rusher in the NFL, but he's elite because of his relentlessly high motor, because of his explosiveness off the snap. And you saw that Sunday against the Rams. Even a leg injury, even a groin injury couldn't keep him down. And I think that he's the type of player that is going to be a difference maker for the Cowboys for years to come. He's a guy who sells out on every single play, and he's a guy that keeps offensive coordinators awake at night and who forces quarterbacks to see ghosts and anticipate pressure even when it's not there. So I think that when you talk about the MVP, I don't think anybody's coming close to Josh Allen. I know it's only 5 weeks and a lot can happen. And I think that Micah Parsons is running away with the NFL Defensive Player of the Year award 1 year after being the unanimous Defensive Rookie of the Year selection. And just staying on the defensive side of the ball for just a minute here, because I'd be remiss if we went through this podcast this week and we didn't touch on what's happening across the NFL from an officiating standpoint. If we didn't touch on the 2 plays that, in my opinion, call into question the integrity and the competency of NFL officials. And that's the sack Grady Jarrett had on Tom Brady on Sunday afternoon with 3 minutes to go in a 7-point game at the 35-yard line. a real chance after that play to give the Falcons the ball back, give them a real chance to win the game. They were coming back. The Buccaneers had no answer in the fourth quarter for the Atlanta Falcons. And you saw Jarrett not only sack Tom Brady, you can maybe make an argument that he threw him to the ground a little bit, but it looked like a pure football play. There was no reason for that to be called unnecessary roughness. There was no reason for that to be called roughing the passer. And you looked at Arthur Smith on the sideline, and he was rightfully apoplectic. In a lot of ways, I know that Atlanta still would have had to drive down the field, and Marcus Mariota would have needed to lead a touchdown drive to win the game. I get it. But the officials interjected themselves in the outcome of that game, in a division game, for a play that wasn't anything close to roughing the passer, wasn't anything close to unnecessary roughness. I understand that you have the specter of what happened to Tua Tagovailoa and the fact that he was allowed to go back into that game 2 weeks ago in Miami when he got knocked to the turf by Matt Milano, and then the nightmare that we saw unfold 4 days later on Thursday Night Football where his fingers froze up and he suffered that concussion on the field in Cincinnati. He needed to be taken to a level 1 trauma center. I get it. I understand that the league is trying to protect the quarterback. I get it. I understand it. But these officials need to differentiate what's happening in the league and the concussion protocol and how to protect players after the moment of a hit like that and what's happening in front of them in the middle of the action. Because that play was not roughing the passer. That play was not unnecessary roughness. And then on Monday night, when Chris Jones sacked Derek Carr, took the ball from it, wrestled the ball from his hands while they're going to the ground and still braced himself and his body weight as he fell to the ground with the other hand. He became the ball carrier in the middle of the play, sacking Derek Carr, and gets flagged for unnecessary roughness, and the Chiefs and the Raiders keep the ball. It was asinine. It was, again, an example of an official interjecting himself in a really close game. If the Raiders go into the locker room 24-0 or 24-7, whatever it was at that point, it might have been a very different game. And it's not just what's happening in these two games. This is now a point of conversation in buildings across the NFL. Because I spoke to a defensive line coach on Tuesday morning, and he told me that in the aftermath of what they saw this weekend, the Grady Jarrett hit and the Chris Jones penalty, that they now have to change what they teach their players. They need to alter what they're telling their players in meetings, on the practice field, because, again, the league is protecting their players. But this coach argued that within the confines of the game, within the snap to the whistle, that the refs are going far too far because of what happened there. And what's worse is that when you look at what happened in Tampa and you look at what happened in Kansas City and you look at all of the games that took place over the weekend, this coach told me that no two officiating crews are calling it the same, so it makes their job even more difficult. And I had a current defensive player, tell me that he understands protecting the quarterback, but it makes their job a lot tougher because it's hard enough to get to the quarterback that now when you're in the pocket, if even for a millisecond, you have to think, am I going to get flagged if I land on this guy too hard? That it slows you down, it makes it even harder. So inside the league, this has become a point of contention. And it is a huge, huge problem for the NFL. It's not just the officials. Because when you think of the league as a whole, it's already tilted significantly in the favor of offenses. Every advantage, whether it's the pass interference rules or the rules to protect quarterbacks, every advantage goes to the offense. Every advantage goes to the passing game. But if you have coaches and players in the moment questioning how hard they can hit a quarterback while they're rushing the passer, it's just another advantage to the quarterback. It's awful for the game. It's awful for the quality of the game. And good for the Kansas City Chiefs fans. They booed that official mercilessly on Monday night. They booed him all the way to halftime. And I think I tweeted this. I hope they would have booed him all night. I mean, you heard the obscene chants that were coming up. They were pissed. They have a right to be. And unless the NFL addresses this, hopefully as soon as the next NFL owners meetings in Manhattan next week, this could be coming to a stadium near you. this could be how the officials call the biggest moments of big games. And that's not great, especially when you have some people now openly questioning the integrity of the game, the outcome, and with all of the influence of sports betting. This is a real slippery slope the NFL might not want to ride on. All right, so let's go to something a little bit more positive. You see the Giants helmet right over there, the New York Giants. They go across the pond to London. They knock off the Green Bay Packers. They make a statement, in my opinion. When my power rankings come out in my National NFL column on Wednesday, they crack the top 10. They're one of the top 10 teams in the league today. I don't know that it's sustainable. I don't know how you sustain that with Daniel Jones at quarterback, who people inside the league loved the effort against the Packers, loved the fight in the second half to come back and the grittiness in the fourth quarter. But they didn't see a quarterback who's really turned the corner. When you have a team whose starting wide receivers were Marcus Johnson and David Sills, and Kenny Galladay's a non-factor, barely on the team, Kadarius Toney isn't playing, I don't know how sustainable it is, but they got the win. Where are they? Right there. They got the win against the Green Bay Packers. They also bring home the Lombardo Trophy. The Lombardo Trophy this week goes to Brian Daboll. For all of the reasons that Randy Mueller and I talked about earlier in the show, the fact that he has this team bought in, the fact that they can win by relentlessly blitzing on defense with Don Wink Martindale as the defensive coordinator, the fact that they've followed through on their belief that Saquon Barkley is one of the most dynamic playmakers in space, and they find new ways to get him involved, whether it's in the Wildcat where he scored a touchdown on Sunday, or whether it's on swing passes or wheel routes or creating mismatches in the passing game, or just watching him get his explosiveness back in the open field. They figured out how to utilize Saquon Barkley properly. And Barkley is fully healthy, and that helps too. But when you look at what the Giants are doing, it's one of the more impressive things that I've seen not only this season, but in the last several years. Because this is a roster going in that when you look top to bottom, I said last week I was wrong. I thought they were a 4-win football team. They're there now. They already have the 4 wins, the 4-1. They're firing on all cylinders. But more importantly, they're confident and they're bought in. And in the NFL, the talent differential between we'll call it the 5th team and the 25th team in the league, it's really not that great. The talent differential isn't all that different. It comes down to motivation. It comes down to scheme. It comes down to coaching. And Brian Daboll has checked all of those boxes for the New York Giants. And there's a reason they're 4-1. There's a reason their brand of football travels. And there's a reason why I think they're going to be a really tough out. I don't know if they're going to win 10 games, but I think at this point, what's standing in their way on the schedule from winning 8 or 9? And if you win 8 games in the NFC, you're in a pretty good spot to make the postseason. And I think that the job that Brian Daboll is doing has silenced a lot of critics. But more importantly, I think it has his players believing that they can walk off with a win every time they step on the field. So this week, the Lombardo Trophy goes to Giants head coach Brian Daboll. And before we get out of here, I want to hand out my pick of the week. We are 1-0. And as we said last week, we're not looking for winners. We're looking for covers. We gave you the Giants last week over the Packers. Put it in the win column. If you cashed, appreciate it. You can thank me at Matt Lombardo NFL on Twitter. You can find my Venmo if you want to throw me a finder's fee, but that's okay. We're going to try to go 2-0 this week, and we're going to stay in the NFC East. And we gave out the Giants a week ago. I really think the Dallas Cowboys at 5.5-point underdogs, this is a game where you're pitting strength on strength. The Eagles have one of the more electrifying offenses in the league. You have the receiving core with A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Quez Watkins, a really prolific tight end who's a matchup nightmare in Dallas Goedert. You saw him basically wrap the game up for them late in Arizona last week. Miles Sanders put the game on ice with the running game. But this is strength on strength because as good, as prolific, as dynamic as the Eagles offense is, that Cowboys defense is loaded with talent. We talked about Micah Parsons. DeMarcus Lawrence is having a great year too. You look at Trayvon Diggs in the backfield, 1 year removed from double-digit interceptions, having a great year as well. The Cowboys defense is really good. Really good. Really dynamic. They have a lot of playmakers there. I think the Eagles win the game. I think they're the better team. I think they're the deeper team. I think they're the more complete team. They're healthier right now. They're not all that banged up. You have the Cowboys coming off the road from being in LA a week ago, a really tough test that came down to the wire. But 5.5 is a big number. And I think the Cowboys defense is good enough to keep them in the game, keep this to a 3 to 5 point game. And at 5.5 point underdogs, there's your cover. So the pick of the week this week on the Matt Lombardo Show is the Dallas Cowboys. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this show, really enjoyed the podcast, really enjoyed the episode. Great conversation with Randy Mueller. I always enjoy picking his brain, getting his insight. Thanks to Randy Mueller for taking the time. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at @RandyMueller_. If you enjoy the podcast, please go ahead and subscribe in the Apple Podcast Store, Spotify, SoundCloud. Check us out on YouTube. And I'd really appreciate those 5-star reviews. They help grow the show. Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at Matt Lombardo NFL. Thanks, as always, to my producer extraordinaire. He's an absolute rock star, Thomas Darrow, in the Lombardo Lounge. Hey, Thomas, we got to work on getting a neon Lombardo Lounge sign. That was a great call by Randy Mueller. I'm Matt Lombardo. I'll talk to you next week right here on the Matt Lombardo Show, presented by Heavy. Have a great week.